The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving had been gloomy. Every year you looked forward to it. The warm laughter, the comforting aromas of your mother's cooking, the familiar warmth of gathered friends and family. This year, however, loneliness echoed through the halls. Your family was distant, and your boyfriend's invitation seemed like a glimmer of comfort you desperately needed. You had barely lifted your hand to knock when the door was swinging open and Draco was pulling you into the manor, into a tight embrace. The warmth his body provided was a stark contrast to the cold loneliness you had felt moments ago. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he muttered into your hair, his arms wrapped firmly around your frame. Draco let out a low chuckle at your giggles, his grip around you tightening. "Took you long enough," he said, pulling back just enough to look down at you. His gaze was a mixture of relief and affection, his grey eyes meeting yours. "I thought you might have changed your mind." Draco's smirk softened into something almost tender, rare, fragile. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind your ear, his fingers lingering just a second too long. "Flattery won't get you out of helping in the kitchen," he said, voice low and teasing. "Mother insisted on roasting 3 turkeys like we're feeding an army." He leaned down until his forehead brushed yours. "But if you keep looking at me like that, I might forget my manners." Draco gently took your hand in his thumb lightly grazing over your knuckles. He began leading you towards the grand dining table, his steps measured and slow. His voice dropped to a barely audible murmur, as if confiding a secret that was just for you. "My family, well," he gave a sharp laugh that was more bitter than amused. "We're a unique bunch, small you might say, but..." He paused next to the table, looking down at you earnestly. "I wanted to make an effort, for you. I know how much Thanksgiving means to you." Draco's eyes held a rare sincerity as he nodded, the corners of his lips tilting up in a slight smile. "For you," he affirmed, his thumb still tracing a pattern on the back of your hand. "I wanted to create something that could feel like home." The grand dining table was now before you, set with extravagant cutlery, polished to a gleam. Delicately placed food arranged in the center, steam gently rising from their surfaces. An air of elegance and thoughtfulness surrounded the setup. Draco guided you gently to your seat, his hand lingering at your waist a moment longer than necessary. He pulled the chair out, gesturing for you to sit, his gaze holding yours for a moment. "My parents will be down shortly," he said with a hint of a smirk. "You know how my mother loves to make a grand entrance. She's probably still fussing over her makeup." His tone was edged with affectionate mockery. Draco gave a nonchalant shrug as he settled into his own chair beside you. "Mother has always had a tolerance for such things," he said, his tone tinged with a hint of sarcasm. "And, well, father..." He trailed off, gaze flickering to the far end of the room before returning to you. "He won't protest, if that's what you're worried about." There was a pause, as if he was holding back another piece of information, an unspoken complication. Draco lifted your hand to his mouth, his cool lips pressing against your skin softly. He held it there for a moment before answering, his voice low and firm. "I'm literally dating a muggle," he said, tone dryly amused. "I think we're far past the am I okay with this phase." He released your hand, his fingers lingering at your wrist before letting go. The corner of his mouth lifted in a smirk. "You're stuck with me now, like it or not." Draco scoffed, rolling his eyes, but there was no real bite to it. "Oh, hate them? Hardly." His smirk turned sharper as he leaned in slightly. "I just happen to prefer one in particular," he murmured, voice dropping low enough that only you could hear it. Then he pulled back abruptly as the grand doors at the far end of the dining hall swung open with a dramatic creak. His mother stood framed in silver candlelight, immaculate robes fluttering behind her like wings, while Lucius followed behind looking vaguely irritated. Draco shot you an exasperated glance and muttered under his breath, "Try not to look too shocked when Mother starts asking if your bloodline can trace back past 1800. A faint smile ghosted over Draco's face as he watched you stifle a laugh.
Meanwhile, Narcissa glided into the room, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Lucius, his expression still rather sour, followed closely behind her. They took their seats at the head of the table, Lucius giving you a cursory glance before turning his focus back to his son. Narcissa, however, was all smiles. She looked between the two of you, her gaze lingering just a little too long on your clasped hands. Narcissa's smile was cool but not unkind as she greeted you, her voice like silk over steel. "Darling, what a pleasure to have you with us," she said smoothly, one hand resting lightly on Lucius's shoulder. "We thought it prudent to observe this occasion." Her grey eyes flicked briefly toward Draco before returning. "After all," she added in a lighter tone, almost conspiratorial, "one must celebrate when their son insists."
Lucius muttered something under his breath about Muggle traditions and reached for the wine decanter without looking up.
Narcissa's gaze softened ever so slightly, her head tilting just a fraction. "Of course, dear. We're happy to have you," she said, her tone still measured but with a touch of warmth.
Draco, however, had been silently watching the exchange, a barely noticeable tension in the line of his shoulders. His hand resting on your knee under the table gave a subtle squeeze, a silent reassurance.
Lucius, having finished pouring his wine and downing it in one go, shot a disgruntled glance at Narcissa as she nudged him. He swallowed, then cleared his throat before speaking. "Well," he began gruffly, "happy to have you, of course." His eyes lingered on you, still holding a hint of suspicion. "Though Muggle traditions," he added, the last word sounding like he'd bitten into a lemon, "are new to me. Still, if my son finds it important." Lucius's gaze flickered between you and Draco, noting the subtle intimacy of your seating arrangement. His expression remained stern, but there was the faintest softening of his features. "If it makes him happy, I'm..." He paused, clearly unused to expressing this sentiment. "Happy." He took another long drink from his glass, avoiding your gaze.
Draco, on the other hand, looked mildly shocked at this uncharacteristic show of affection from his father.
Narcissa's smile widened, just a fraction, as she flicked her napkin onto her lap with practiced elegance. "Good," she repeated, as if sealing an unspoken agreement. "Now I'm starving." Her voice was light but carried the weight of someone who had waited far too long to be served in their own home. She shot Lucius another pointed look when he didn't immediately rise to summon the house elf.
Draco coughed into his fist, poorly hiding a laugh at your expense, and muttered under his breath, "Careful. Once Mother starts eating, there's no stopping her."
Lucius lifted a single, imperious finger. His signature mooted immediate compliance. "Food. Now."
Draco leaned toward you under the cover of reaching for water and muttered, "Told you they'd come running when Father finally decided to use that tone." His smirk was all mischief now, clearly enjoying this rare display from his father despite himself. House elves began to file in from the kitchen, piling platter upon platter of tantalizing delights on the now extended dining table. Turkey glistening with herbs and butter, roasted root vegetables in honey glaze, roasted potatoes so crisply golden they seemed to crackle under the chandelier light. And of course there was the pièce de résistance, a glistening pecan pie, its aroma filling the air with the rich scent of warm sugar and spices. The sheer abundance of it all was overwhelming. Lucius's scowl of impatience morphed into a quiet, smug satisfaction at your wide-eyed wonder. Even Narcissa, usually so controlled, allowed a hint of a smile to grace her lips at your reaction. Draco, however, had his gaze fixed on you. He watched with something akin to fascination as your eyes took in the lavish spread before you. His hand underneath the table gave your knee an almost affectionate squeeze. Impressed, he murmured softly.
Narcissa's smile widened, her head inclining slightly to acknowledge your compliment. "Why, thank you, dear," she replied, her tone smooth as silk. "I do pride myself on my taste."
Draco snickered softly at the blatant hint, leaning into you discreetly and muttering, "She'd feed you until you burst if she could."
Narcissa, her plate now heaped with food, turned her attention back to you. "This Thanksgiving tradition, what exactly does one do?" "Gratitude," she repeated slowly, as if the word was an exotic dish she was trying for the first time. Her eyes flicked to Draco, who was watching you with mild amusement, before returning to you. "And this tradition," she continued, her voice taking an almost inquisitive tone, "it involves food and family. Just gathering." Narcissa's lips parted slightly, as if she were mentally cataloguing this bizarre but touchingly simple tradition. She exchanged a glance with Lucius, who looked like he'd just been handed an unsolvable riddle written in muggled script. Then, unexpectedly,
Draco leaned forward abruptly. "So," he drawled, his smirk widening into something dangerously playful as his mother and father both turned to stare at him. "Does that mean I get to say thanks for putting up with me all year?" The table fell silent for a beat before Narcissa let out a sharp laugh, more surprised than amused, and even Lucius's scowl cracked ever so slightly at the sheer audacity of it. Draco leaned back in his seat, looking far too casual for the tension crackling in the air. Lucius looked like he'd eaten a raw lemon whole. Even Narcissa was blinking, surprise etched into her features, but they all stayed silent, waiting to see where this was going.
"Fine," Lucius rumbled gruffly, his grip on his cutlery white-knuckled. "As it's a tradition, let's start with the..." His lips twisted around the word like it tasted foul. "Gratitude. I suppose I'm thankful for this meal and company." His gaze flicked briefly to Narcissa, possibly for assurance, though she merely raised an eyebrow at him, and lingered just a fraction longer on Draco, who looked like he was just fighting off a smirk.
Narcissa, in her usual silken tone, gently dismissed Lucius's contribution, her voice taking on a surprisingly genuine softness. "Do not mind my husband," she began, her eyes gleaming with warmth. "He is," she chose the next word carefully, "less practiced in expressing gratitude." Her gaze shifted, locking with yours, and a smile graced her lips, far less guarded than usual. "I, however, am grateful for my family, for our home, and for the joy they bring," she continued. There was a subtle pause then. "For your company." The corners of Narcissa's mouth turned up a small fraction more at your whispered thanks. She inclined her head ever so slightly, a gesture of polite acknowledgement that might have been misinterpreted as regal arrogance coming from someone else. Draco, watching from your side, smirked into his wine glass, clearly amused at his parents' attempts at Muggle-style gratitude. Lucius, on the other hand, looked like he'd rather be dueling a troll than engaging in this conversation.
Your words, sincere and heartfelt in their simplicity, had an unexpected impact. Lucius, his gruff exterior cracking just a bit, nodded gruffly as if to acknowledge your sentiment. Narcissa, however, watched you warmly, her gaze holding less of the usual reserve. Draco, beside you, was quiet, but his hand found yours again, beneath the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. It was clear that, despite their initial reluctance, the Malfoys appreciated the raw honesty you were bringing to the table.
Lucius, having spent much of the last few minutes in stony silence, cleared his throat, his voice gruff but noticeably softer. He began hesitantly, glancing at Narcissa for reassurance. She gave an encouraging nod, lips curving in the faintest imitation of a smile. "We are grateful to have you," he forced out, sounding as if he was swallowing some particularly disagreeable potion. And we are delighted to be celebrating this Thanksgiving with you."
Draco stifled a laugh beside you. Everyone's expectant gazes shifted to Draco, including yours, as it was his turn to share his gratitude. Draco smirked, but there was something more genuine beneath the mask of sly mischief, and when he turned to you, his eyes softened ever so slightly. "You," he murmured, voice low enough that most people around the table wouldn't hear it. "It's you I'm thankful for." Draco, his gaze still lingering on you, just a few moments longer than necessary, finally turned to face his parents. Lucius and Narcissa, both watching him with quiet curiosity under a veneer of stoicism, seemed as equally surprised as everyone else at the sincerity in Draco's tone. "And I'm thankful for my parents," he said, his eyes meeting theirs in turn. "My mother," he turned to Narcissa. "My father," he turned to Lucius. "Thanks for everything." His father looked as if he might have choked on his wine.
Narcissa's lips curled into a rare, genuine smile, one that held both warmth and quiet pride. "My son," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of emotion. "Thank you." Then, with effortless grace and just a hint of Malfoy command, she lifted her hands slightly, an unspoken signal, and every candle in the room flared brighter for an instant before settling back to their usual glow. She turned to Lucius expectantly, as if daring him to comment on this sudden burst of magical enthusiasm for dinner. He merely grunted and reached again for his wine.
Draco shot you another look under his lashes. "Told you she'd make it dramatic."
Lucius, his gruff exterior slowly softening in the face of so much gratitude, grumbled a reluctant concession. "Come on now," he muttered, his usual frown not quite as deep as before. "Let's dig in." His gaze flicked over the food again before adding, this muggle food, well, it looks surprisingly delicious." A hint of genuine surprise had crept into his voice, perhaps surprising even himself.
Draco choked on a laugh, nearly spilling his goblet of pumpkin juice. His mother shot Lucius a look, somewhere between amusement and exasperation, while you bit your lip to keep from giggling.
Lucius, realizing what he just said and hating that it was true, cleared his throat loudly. "I meant the turkey," he snapped defensively, stabbing at it with unnecessary force before muttering, "and perhaps the potatoes."
She waved a hand towards the dishes lining the table. "Please, help yourself," she encouraged, her gaze flickering to Lucius, who was eyeing the turkey greedily. "There's no need to hold back."
The grand dining room filled with the clink of silverware and murmured conversation as everyone finally began eating. Lucius, despite his grumbling, piled his plate high, though he still eyed some dishes suspiciously. Draco's hand found yours beneath the table again, warm and steady. He leaned in close enough that only you could hear him over Narcissa's polite chatter about properly seasoned turkeys. "See?" he murmured smugly against your ear. "Mother's already planning next year's menu. And father?" "He'll never admit it aloud," Draco added dryly, before nodding toward where Lucius was now begrudgingly taking a second helping of mashed potatoes, butter swirling visibly on top. "But they're happy." His smirk softened into something quieter then.
Narcissa, ever the gracious hostess, smiled at the compliment. Her face softened in the warm light of the table setting, making her seem younger than usual. "Thank you, dear," she replied, her tone light but sincere. "I do hope you find everything to your liking." Her eyes flicked to where Lucius was devouring a third helping of mashed potatoes with surprising enthusiasm. She hid a smirk behind her wine glass. "I dare say some people are enjoying it more than expected as well."
Draco, watching his parents with an almost fond amusement, chuckled low in agreement. He leaned over again, dropping his voice for you only. "I can't believe father is actually enjoying this muggle food."
Lucius, with his mouthful of mashed potatoes, paused mid-chew to turn his attention to you. He swallowed with a thoughtful, though slightly suspicious look in his eye before replying, How often do muggles celebrate this Thanksgiving? With food like this, you just celebrate it once a year? Madness, he added with a small shake of his head.
Draco beside you was trying desperately not to laugh into his napkin at his father's sudden enthusiasm. Despite the ache of missing your own family's traditions, your mother's laughter, your father's jokes, the familiar creak of your home around you, the warmth in this room made up for some of it. Lucius was gruff but not unkind as he passed you a dish with an impatient flick. Narcissa asked quiet questions about how you celebrated back home, her gaze softening just slightly when you described things. And Draco kept stealing glances at you between bites, his smirk lingering every time he caught your eye, like exactly where your thoughts had wandered. He didn't say anything to fix it. Instead, he nudged a plate closer to yours and muttered, "Eat more," as if food could replace love, but maybe tonight. It was enough.